Okay, in this short lesson, we're going to take a quick look at converting decimal measures. Some measures are taken in fraction form, while a blueprint may show decimal form. So you might have this situation going on. And, you know, the more global our economies become, the more often welders and any kind of technical worker is going to have to deal with this. Very often, the rest of the world deals with metric system. And so we have measures in metrics. Very often when you're looking at a blueprint, it might be in metrics, and you have to convert each of those measures to our standard measures, whether it's inches or feet or whatever it might be. When you do that, you'll end up with some decimal form, and then you may have to convert that form into portions of an inch. So that's what we're getting at here. So next chapter, we're really going to be looking at doing those kinds of conversions, but I want to take a look at this here because it's part of our measuring. Let's say you have something like 18 and 462 thousandths of an inch, and we need to convert this to 30 seconds of an inch, and because in our game plan we need to be, precise to the 30 seconds of an inch. This in a nutshell just kind of tells you what it is step by step that you do. You will multiply the decimal portion by 32, and then you're going to round up to the nearest whole number. There are a couple applications where you would not round up, you would round down. That's usually in the medical field. I can't think of too many applications where you're going to come across that outside of that. This, when you round up to the nearest whole number, that will be your numerator of your fraction, and then you're going to reduce that fraction. So we're going to do a couple examples, and I want to explain in this first example why this process works. So let's say we have 18 and 462 thousandths, and we need to get this converted to 30 seconds. Applying this outline here, I'm going to take the decimal portion of this and multiply by 32. When I punch that into my calculator, I have 14 and 784 thousandths. That whole number there rounds up to 15. So my final measure, 18 and 462 thousandths, would convert to 18 and 15 30 seconds. And you're like, wow, magic, why does that work? Two things I want to point out how this works is we know that we've got 18 inches for sure, so the 18 part isn't changing. It's this 462 thousandths. Well, I want you to recognize that 462 thousandths of an inch could be written as a fraction like this. Okay, so I wrote it as a fraction. I'm going to equate this. I'm looking for the equivalent fraction with a denominator of 32. So in other words, 462 out of 1,000 is equal to how many out of 32? And from our cross multiply and divide proportion skills, we know that we would cross multiply and divide. So you would punch into your calculator 462 times 32, and then we would divide by 1,000. And what happened here is we just went ahead and left this dividing by 1,000 is equivalent to leaving this in decimal form. So we left that in decimal form and just multiplied by 32. So we did it all in one step. So you just found the equivalent ratio to 462 thousandths. That ratio here would be 14,784. Now the other thing is I want you to recognize that we're going to lose some accuracy here because we're rounding off to the nearest whole number, which becomes our numerator here. So we lose a little bit of accuracy anytime you do this. So I just want you to be aware of that. Okay, so going over here, we have another item that we need to deal with. We are going to convert 3 and 175 thousandths of an inch to the nearest 16th, and then we're going to do it again to the 30 seconds. So I'm going to draw a line here. We're going to do 16ths here. I'm going to take the decimal portion, 175 thousandths, and I'm just going to multiply by 16. That is going to give me 2.8, and I need to round this to the nearest whole number. So I go immediately to the right. That's greater. I come back here. It's greater than 5, so I'm going to come back here and round that up to 3. So the numerator is now going to be 3, and this was 16ths that I was rounding to the 16th. So it'd be 3 and 175 thousandths is equivalent to 3 and 3/16 of an inch. Okay, if I had to round this to the 32nd, I would take 75 times 32. When I punch that in my calculator, I get 5.6, and I need to round this to the nearest whole number. So I'm going to be looking immediately to the right. This is greater, so I'm going to round this up to 6. So that would be 6 30-seconds. So this would be 3 and 6 30-seconds, and I'm hoping you'd stop and say, well, those are both even. I can reduce them. So you go ahead and you round that to, the 3 is going to stay, but you're going to divide both numerator and denominator by 2, and you get 3/16. And you're like, wait a minute, this is of an inch. Both of these answers, both when I rounded them to the 16th and to the 32nd, both of them came out to be 3 and 3/16. So what you need to recognize here is that 6 30-seconds is an actual 16th. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little thing here. I've taken an inch and kind of blew it up, and I didn't get nearly as exact to the 16ths. But I blew up an inch here, and I think all of us would know that that mark right here, breaking this inch in half, would be half. Half of a half would be, well, let me do this down here. Half of a half would be 1/4, and half of a fourth would be 1/8, and half of an eighth would be 1/16. But I'd want you to recognize, okay, so we'd have 1/16. Every other 16th could be reduced. The 1/8 could also be written as 2/16. Then we'd have 3/16. Well, the 1/4 could be written as 2/8 as well as 3/16. And then we'd move on to 5/16. We could go to 6/16. Kind of doing this a little bit backwards. But 6/16 would reduce to 3/8. And we could leave it at that. And then we go to 7/16. And then our next one would be, I've got this totally out of order, but we could have this be 2/4, 8/16. I kind of missed the ace in there, but we can see that there's many different ways to communicate our common denominator. And move on to our last problem in this, and we are going to take what size wrench to the nearest 32nd of an inch is needed to fit a bolt with 748 thousandths of a head. This would be an application where we don't have a whole number to deal with, so we're going to deal with 748 thousandths times 32, which is going to give us 23.936, which that's going to round up when we go to the nearest whole number. That's going to round up to 24. So we could write that this was 30 seconds, so we're going to be putting this this becomes our numerator, so we put 24 over 32. We'd need to recognize that, gosh, both of those, numerator and denominator, are multiples of 8. So I divided both numerator and denominator by 8. We'd end up with 3/4. So I'd be using the 3/4 inch wrench.